For days, Vivienne Binns resisted the idea of adding teeth to her painting of a vagina. The image kept coming to my mind and I kept rejecting it. Finally, I got tired of trying to avoid them and I just put them in. Something clicked. The painting, which Binns describes as brightly colored but crudely executed, worked as she intended as a metaphor for the power of the feminine. A hole Binns painted in the center of the vagina in Vag Dens seems to lead to another world. Binns would not give it its title, Vag Dens, until after its debut, in her first exhibition, Paintings and Constructions, which opened at the Waters Gallery in Sydney in 1967. At the show, a friend who was a psychologist told her that the image of the toothed vagina appeared in many cultures in different eras, and was sometimes called vagina dentata. Binns, who had arrived at the image on her own, was amazed to find it had resonated with others across history. Hanging alongside Vag Dens in the Waters exhibition was the painting Phallic Monument, dual portraits of male and female genitals. Those two were conceived to go together, Binns told ABC's The Art Show recently. Vag Dens and Phallic Monument were later acquired by the National Gallery of Australia. The artist, now 81, is among those featured in The Exhibitionists, a new docu-comedy from the ABC that highlights how Australian women have had to confront entrenched sexism to carve out spaces in the arts. The Exhibitionists also captures the early responses of critics to Binns' work. Reviews described monumental repulsion and pure obscene horror. One accused her of creating quite the most disturbing artwork I've ever seen. Art critic Elwyn Lynn wrote that Binns had turned Waters Gallery into a 10th-rate phallic temple, and said her work affronts masculinity. 55 years later, these same paintings are being celebrated as part of the major survey exhibition Vivian Binns, On and Through the Surface, which opened at Monash University Museum of Art in Melbourne in February, and will transfer to the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney in July. Incorporating more than 100 works across the mediums of painting, printmaking, sculpture and drawing, the exhibition reveals how Binns responded to questions of women's social and sexual liberation, from tapping into the charged, disquieting waters of her own subconscious to looking outward, and embracing a community of neglected and invisible women artists. Confronting sexism in the everyday. Anyone looking at that 1967 Waters Gallery exhibition might have been surprised to discover that Binns was considered a bit repressed by her classmates at the National Art School. When she enrolled in 1958, she wore her hair long and kept it pinned back in a French roll. I knew that I'd found what it was for me to be an artist, says Binns of her first exhibition. To some people I seemed like a librarian. I was a bit too intellectual. I certainly wasn't a good time girl, she reflects. Neither was she always considered a real artist. There definitely was a sense that as a young woman, you weren't regarded as promising in the way that some of the men were, she says. She grew used to hearing that women didn't need to make art they could create by having children. There were predatory relationships between lecturers and students, and there would be some bias towards women who didn't comply with the desires of some men, she says. That was the sort of ground we walked on. Binns wasn't interested in conforming to traditional gender roles, and wanted to focus on the question of what it meant for her to be an artist. I also was just trying to find out what it meant for me to be an adult in the world outside of my family. Vivienne Binns, as a student in front of the National Arts School, as featured in a Women's Weekly article from 1960. After she graduated in 1962, she withdrew from her friends and relatives, and increasingly began to invest her time in thinking and talking about art with friends, including the artist Mike Brown, who she recalls was similarly intense. The question about my sexuality, that was what I was dealing with through this initial, intense, introversion, she reflects. At the same time, I was making art, and examining the methods of making, thinking about the ideas and philosophies of art, of surrealism, and Dada in particular. She knew the Dadaists had been heavily influenced by World War I. What had happened was so awful, so fantastical, so destructive, it turned the world upside down. and just made nonsense of what we had considered to be a sane and sensible, ordered world, she explains. Yet in embracing the ridiculous, the Dadaists seem to uncover something more honest and truthful. Behind everything I've done is this question: what is art? What is it as a human activity, says Binns. I absorbed that, and I found my way to those realizations myself by questioning and breaking through the conventions of social life, the rules that I had learned through school, and through family and so on. I had to challenge these social conventions to see what happened. Art enables you to go through a process like this without destroying the world. Turning to craft and community art. Grace Oldfield and Binns packing work for West Point Plaza exhibition at Blacktown. For Binns, creating the works in the Waters Gallery exhibition had felt like going to the end of madness and back. She decided she needed a break from painting. Speculation followed her decision. Some journalist or someone decided that I stopped painting because I was so distressed by the show's reception, but that's not true, she says. I knew so much about the work, the process and the material, that there wasn't anything that anybody could tell me that really displaced me in any way, Binns recalls. It was a significant fork in the road. It was actually one of the early big steps that separated my practice from that classical, male type of practice where you just keep on going, she says. I literally did not want to be tied to any of those rules of how to become a great painter. I needed to step away, and I did. In the years that followed, Binns immersed herself in community arts projects. As a field officer for the Australia Council's Community Arts Program in the early 70s, she travelled widely and created active networks of artists. During this period, she also discovered a deep love for making vitreous enamel, among other mediums generally considered craft work. At the time, there was no way to speak about craft and art in the same sentence, without putting them in opposition, but I didn't see them that way, she says. Moira Lynch and Binns enameling at Blacktown. Binns was riding deep currents of change. In 1974, she became a founding member of the Sydney chapter of the Women's Art Movement, which also had groups in Canberra, Melbourne and Adelaide. Together, they would celebrate women artists and confront problems of sexism and discrimination. Their solidarity fueled a surge of creative action and art. The group's agenda was informed by key questions. Why were there so few famous women artists? Why did all the big exhibitions feature mostly men? And most important of all, what creative work were women actually doing? In 1980, Binns recorded her mother's memories in a work called Self-Portrait, Self-Image. It was as part of this conversation that Binns became interested in her mother's memories, and specifically in the family album. In her landmark work Mother's Memories, Others' Memories, she collaborated with women at the University of New South Wales and in Blacktown to record matrilineal histories. Together, they reinterpreted memories drawn from anecdotes, letters, diaries, handcrafts, photos from family albums in a series of screen-printed cards, which were displayed on a postcard carousel. I remember us talking about the kinds of choices our mothers made for the family album. How they chose the photographs that showed us heading towards the kind of conventional life that they most wanted for us, grow up, get married, have children, maybe have a nice job. It was really interesting to realize the level of choice that went into those kinds of things, and that was part of that interrogation of social norms. Tower of Babel by Vivienne Binns at the National Gallery, Australia. In 1989, Binns returned to Waters Gallery with an ambitious community art project called the Tower of Babel. The artwork comprised 50 small dioramas, created by Binns and people she knew, including teachers and mentors Irene Mayer and Mike Brown, friends and close colleagues including the artists Ruth Waller, Bonita Ely and Eugene Carcesio, and students and participants encountered throughout her career. Each person had complete agency over their box, making this a significant work of community art. It included a sound element, a soft babble of voices that was only audible when you approached the work. The Tower of Babel is ongoing, now at 90 boxes and counting. Each box for me represents a different cultural context, says Binns. The people are the